Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining the meeting today. I'd like to start by just talking about a bit about my experience, really. So as someone who's delivered digital projects in pharma now for nearly 20 years, I could say that I've had my fair share of frustrations over the years when trying to get enthusiasm and momentum behind pushing digital adoption forwards in the industry. I must have had countless conversations over the years with pharma medics and compliance teams, and even pharma marketers, where I've heard the words, "It can't be done." So amongst all of the bad news we've endured over the last 10 weeks in my professional life, I've actually found it incredibly refreshing to start to hear pharma people say things like, how can we make this digital? And perhaps even more exciting, what's the fastest way that we can make this digital? It's always seemed strange to me that an industry that is by its very nature incredibly innovative consistently brings up the rear when compared to other sectors for digital adoption. And I think there's actually a really good reason why pharma should be looking to optimize the digital activity, regardless of the situation we currently find ourselves in. If you look at data from IQVIA, it shows that in all of the major markets, the top selling newly launched pharma brands have an overall higher share of digital contacts with HCPs and other launches. And in fact, across all 4 quarters following launch, the average share of digital contacts was significantly higher for those top performing launch brands. So digital does seem to work in our sector. And of course, there is that even more pressing reason right now why pharma must move to a more digitally led approach. I think our traditional model of face-to-face rep activity has been pulled out from beneath our feet. And I personally believe it's highly unlikely that after such a long period without seeing reps face-to-face, that healthcare institutions are going to swing open their doors and invite pharma reps back into surgeries and hospitals in the way that we used to. So for us as an industry, I think the world as we know it has changed forever. So what to do? Well, I think to its credit, pharma has in recent years started to really embrace lots of different channels. But where I think we haven't done as good a job as we might have is in joining those channels up. As an industry, we still tend to utilize channels in isolation. But I think we will see an explosion of integrated channel marketing over the next few years. And certainly a lot of the big players in the market, such as Viva and IQVIA, are really pushing companies now to think in a much more joined up way. For example, reps triggering emails after a sales call. So I'd encourage all of you to spend some time looking at your channel mix and think about how you can help your customers move around your ecosystem with each channel promoting and signposting the others. And of course, that's what it's all about. It's about helping our customers and our patients. So for me, I think the final stage that we're going to see in digital evolution in pharma will be one where we really do put the customer or the patient at the center of everything we do, helping them access the information that they want about our brands at a time and in a format that suits them. In my view, I think right now there are a few channels that offer a significant opportunity for pharma to offer greater value to its customers, and that's what I'm going to focus on for the rest of this talk. So those channels I'm going to focus on today are chatbots and live chat, e-learning, and webinars. And I'm just going to start with chatbots. So those of you that know me, or maybe follow me on Twitter or LinkedIn, will know that I can't stop banging on about chatbots. And Kim will agree with that as well. But I do believe that for a lot of pharma companies, this is a technology that's a bit of a no-brainer, especially right now when face-to-face activity is so restricted. So why should you consider a chatbot? Well, there's hundreds of articles and surveys and studies that have looked at consumer behavior and the role that chatbots might play in customer experience. And I will share a reference list after the event today of the references that I've used here. And I think it's really important that we do remember that healthcare professionals and patients are consumers like the rest of us. And these days in our interactions with banks or retailers, travel and utility companies, we all expect, in fact, we demand instant access to our questions and instant responses. Yet the average time it takes a company to respond to a message is 10 hours. So it's no surprise, I think, that consumers say that companies need to transform how they engage with them. And 3/4 of consumers say chatbots will transform their expectations of customer experience over the next 5 years. And that's really driven an explosion of chatbot utilization across other sectors. Last year's CMO survey found that 89% of companies with revenues in the $500 million to $1 billion category, which is the sort of size where the UK affiliates of medium to large size pharma companies would sit, are now using conversational AI for customer service. And whilst there's still very few examples of the use of chatbot technology in healthcare, there are some quite interesting case studies. I'm going to share a couple of those with you today. So this first example is a chatbot that we've developed with Norgene, and it's aimed at patients who are preparing for a colonoscopy. Now, I think Kim's going to talk a little bit more about this, perhaps in more detail later, but what I'll say now is that I love the why behind this project. There was a really clear unmet need for these patients in that, you know, the night before their colonoscopy, when nobody else is around to ask, the pharmacies are closed, GPs aren't around, this chatbot neatly provides the solution of answering those unmet questions that they might have. This is a chatbot that allows free text input, and it offers support for patients via video and animations and text responses, as well as signposting other relevant materials that would help the patient at that time. And as I said, I think Kim's going to touch on this a little bit later as well. Now, one of the great things I think about chatbots is that you can repurpose the same bot across multiple channels. And this is a really good example of that. Teva developed a chatbot for their brand Braltus, and they actually embedded it into their online advertising, which in this example that you can see on the screen is the respiratory section of MIMS. So when a healthcare professional hovers over the ad or clicks on it, the chatbot appears, and the healthcare professional can then have a conversation with the brand right there in the ad at a time and a place when they're thinking about prescribing. So that's really, if you think about it, that's really powerful time to be communicating with customers. But obviously chatbots can't be programmed to cover every possible question. And sometimes an inquiry is so complex, it does need to be addressed by a human. And for me, that's where I think live chat comes in. Now, again, there's nothing new about live chat. It's been used in other sectors for many years, and it hasn't really been adopted in pharma, which I think is a little strange when you consider how much pharma companies invest into medical information or into customer services teams. So live chat can be a standalone channel, but it can also be integrated with a chatbot. And in this example, you can see how a conversation initiated with a chatbot on the right can then be handed off to a live person whose screen you can see on the left. And they can see the conversation history, which means they can seamlessly take over that conversation and have a free text chat, or they can choose from pre-prepared responses with the end user. They can also attach videos and other documents that might be relevant to that conversation. Of course, if there's no live chat agent available, either because we're outside of office hours or maybe because they're all busy on calls or handling other inquiries, then the chatbot can revert back to taking users' details and giving them other contact information for them to get further help. So I think from a customer experience perspective, integrating a chatbot with live chat really does give you the best of both worlds. So is there an ROI? Well, we find that chatbots can typically answer up to 80% of users' questions. And that, of course, frees up the time of the people who would otherwise be dealing with those inquiries, whether that's via email or phone. Typically, around a third of all visitors to websites that have a chatbot use the chatbot. So that means even on low traffic websites, you could be looking at over 1,500 conversations a year, which if you look at that on a cost per conversation basis, that's a fraction of the cost of a human handling those inquiries. We also see that 70% of pharma chatbot users rate them as helpful. So that's immediately telling us that they do see this as a good customer service tool. And when you look at the use of chatbots in advertising, we see that drives a huge increase in the interaction rates compared to standard advertising. So again, you're getting more bang for your buck. And finally, I think chatbots give you really, really valuable data, because you get to see all of the questions that customers have about your products, and then you can use those to inform your future communication activities. So let's move on to e-learning. Now, I said earlier that we really need to start thinking about putting the customer at the center of all we do. And if that's the case, then I think it's important that we ask them what they want from pharmaceutical companies. Now, interestingly, in this survey of 2,800 healthcare professionals, medical education, educational content, and new clinical data were the top 3 types of information that they wanted to get from pharma. Yet, perhaps not unsurprisingly, the majority of information they receive is promotional information. So I think access to high quality education is really crucial for healthcare professionals, but it is harder for them to come by than maybe you'd think. For example, we were looking at a project last year in vaccines where we interviewed lots of primary care nurses and GPs, and across the board, they were telling us they were desperate for access to high quality and free education. Now, of course, traditionally farmers delivered that education through live events, but I have seen an increasing number of companies now looking at on-demand e-learning as a way of upskilling healthcare professionals on the diseases in which their drugs are used. Traditionally, I think Pharma's delivered its e-learning content through third parties, usually medical publishers. And I can see a lot of sense in that, in that taking your content out to where healthcare professionals are. To use an old marketing phrase, you fish where the fish are. But I think the problem is that working in that way, the publishers are the ones that own that relationship and therefore own the access to the customer. And I believe that the age is now upon us where it's time for Pharma to start building its own communities, to start having rich, long-term relationships with their customers. In this case study here, which is a platform built by Takeda in Europe. And they've done just that with this particular platform. They deliver e-learning, they manage all of their live event registrations, they deliver webinars, and they also even host closed groups within this platform. So for example, if they have an ad board, they can invite all the members of the ad board to the group, and then they can share files and have conversations on the platform. So every interaction that the healthcare professional has with Takeda in an educational capacity flows through this platform, and that allows them to build up strong relationships over time and generate permissions for other marketing opportunities outside of the platform. Of course, I think third-party publishers will continue to have an important role to play, but for me, instead of hosting content, their role will be more as a channel to direct users to Pharma's own solutions. Now, it goes without saying that unless the content is great, healthcare professionals aren't going to want to engage with it. So here's my vision for Pharma content nirvana. So what I'd love to see is less static, boring slides and much more interactive, engaging content. I'd like to see presentations being less wordy and much more audiovisual. I'm thinking video and I'm thinking podcasts. I'd like to see content that's less designed for the desktop and more designed for consumption on the move. So imagine healthcare professionals asking Alexa to play them the latest keynote speaker on their commute to work. I'd like to see content that's less one size fits all for the masses and much more about personalized and tailored content to individuals' interests. I'd like to see Pharma move away from delivering hours and hours of monotonous presentations and instead delivering more short, sharp, bite-sized snippets of learning, which studies suggest is actually really effective. And finally, I think our content needs to be less about the Pharma company view and much more about independent expert opinion from thought leaders and innovators. Which brings us on to webinars. Now, of course, over the last 2 months, every man and his dog has become very familiar with video conferencing, and there's certainly been a sudden shift towards webinars by pharma companies who've been forced to rethink symposia that they maybe had planned for later in the year. But I actually think that pharma has been missing a trick with webinars for a long time. We should have been doing this years ago. Because webinars are quick, they're easy to set up, and they're certainly very cost effective compared to live events. Also, I think webinars, if they're done in the right way, can deliver a really rich interactive experience. So here are a few of our tips for webinars. So firstly, think about the platform you use. You might want to consider a platform that offers both synchronous and asynchronous communication, because this then allows individuals to either join the live event or they can then participate later when it's most convenient for them. These days, lots of platforms offer features such as polls or surveys and collaboration via discussion threads or kind of chat. So really think about how you want to engage your audience and what interactions you'd like to have with them, and that will help you to decide which platform to use. I'd encourage you all to make sure that any content you create through webinars can last longer and reach further than just the webinar itself. So make sure you do record the event, which then allows you to share it online afterwards. And also think about how you can use that recording either as sharing the whole webinar or maybe breaking it into individual talks. You can also continue the polls afterwards if you've run polls during the event, and you can also continue that discussion. And I would really recommend that if you've had registrants for the webinar, you can then use your permissions to email those registrants when there's things updated about the webinar or when there's new questions or content that's been added. Think about your agenda and your meeting format as well. So in face-to-face meetings, sessions tend to be interspersed with breaks and time for networking. And they also tend to have a range of topics just to try and keep the interest levels high for those that are attending the meeting. And I think that virtual meetings really should try and follow that same format. You should look to keep meetings less than 60 minutes so that you can keep people's attention. And then you can always take the discussion offline afterwards. And if you do have a lot of content to cover, think about doing a virtual conference. These can take place over a period of days or weeks, and the content can then be broken down into shorter bite-sized sections. Finally, I think promotion is absolutely key. Use all of your other channels to drive signups, like I talked about earlier. So make sure all those channels are integrated. And if it is a key event, you might want to consider using paid digital marketing. And Rob's going to come on and talk about digital marketing in the next session today. So what does the ROI look like for a webinar? Well, again, the cost per attendee for a webinar is typically much lower than the cost of, for example, a rep call. But of course, that does vary depending on how many attendees you achieve and how much you want to spend on marketing the event. We've definitely seen more and more interest in webinars in recent weeks. And the partners that we work with to run webinars are delivering on average at the moment 2 a day for pharmaceutical companies. And the sort of attendance that you can see in this case study here, which was 444 for this particular event, that's pretty typical of the sort of attendances that they're seeing at the moment in pharma-sponsored webinars. And I think the great thing about webinars is that they are very measurable. So you will know how long users have spent in the session. You can see how engaged they were depending on the platform you use. And of course, you do get the data from audience polls, which you can then use that to inform your future marketing. So to summarize, I think the world has changed, and I think it's changed forever. I think that chatbots do offer an enhanced customer experience opportunity for pharmaceutical companies, you know, providing those 24/7 touch points that healthcare professionals and patients as consumers demand. We know that healthcare professionals really rate medical education as the most important content that they want to get from pharma, but I think it's time for us now to start building those learning communities rather than just giving that educational content away. And I think webinars represent a really flexible, credible alternative live events, particularly right now when we can't be delivering events face to face. And finally, I think, you know, all of the solutions discussed here can generate a great ROI, and it's really important when you're setting up any of these channels that you think about the KPIs and the ROI that you want to deliver so that you can measure success. So thank you very much. As I said, my name's Chris Finch, and you can get me at on the email address here, chris@earthware.co.uk, or if you've got your mobile phone to hand, you can scan that QR code, and that will enable you to connect with me on LinkedIn. And I'd be more than happy to have conversation with you on LinkedIn or via email. Thank you very much.